At this point, you should have written down all of the vocabulary at the top of your big green notes page. And now I'm ready to tell you a story. So you can put your pencils down and just listen up. So this is a story all about the quad family tree. Way back when, there were two quadrilaterals, Grandma and Grandpa Quad. And Grandma and Grandpa Quad, well, here's our tree. But Grandma and Grandpa Quad had two children, Papa Parallelogram and Trappy the Trapezoid. Now, although they were from the same family, they were very different, as brothers and sisters usually are. Trappy the Trapezoid, she liked to be a loner. She liked to be one. She liked to be on her own. So she went off and did her own thing. Whereas Papa Parallelogram, he liked to keep things somewhat in line. And as you can see, he's got opposite sides parallel. Well, Papa Parallelogram had two children, Rhomby the Rhombus and Rec the Rectangle. Now his two kids, they had more in common than Papa Parallelogram and his sister Trappy. Rec the Rectangle and Rhomby the Rhombus shared traits or properties with their father, Papa Parallelogram. They too both had opposite sides parallel. However, Rhomby the Rhombus and Rec the Rectangle did have some differences. If we look at the Rhomby the Rhombus, although she had both sides parallel just like her father, she liked to keep things a little bit more equal. So she had all four congruent sides. Her brother, Rec the Rectangle, also liked to keep some things congruent, but he chose to keep his four corners congruent. So he has four right angles. Now, one day, Rec the Rectangle and Rhomby the Rhombus went to their father, and they said, Papa Parallelogram, can we please get a pet? Well, Papa Parallelogram said, yes, you may get a pet, but you must come to a consensus, come to an agreement, and take one trait from each of you that you want to have in your pet. So, Rec the Rectangle and Rhomby the Rhombus agreed on a pet. They found their dog, Square. Now, if we take a look at Square, a little bit closer look here, you'll notice that Square got the four right corners from Rec the Rectangle, and he got the four congruent sides from Rhomby the Rhombus. Now, if we zoom out a little bit, if we look at our tree as a whole, when I talked through this tree, I talked down the tree, and I gave you all of the different attributes. If you'll remember, Trappy the Trapezoid was off on her own. She was a loner. She likes to be one. She only has one set of parallel sides. Whereas Papa Parallelogram, he's got two sets of parallel lines, and he shared that attribute with his kids, Rhomby the Rhombus and Rec the Rectangle, and then Square had attributes that belong to both Rhomby the Rhombus and Rec the Rectangle, and Papa Parallelogram. So if you'll notice on your notes, and I'd like you to write this down, pick up your pencil and write this down, that as we are going up the tree, as we are going up this quad family tree, statements will be true. So if I were to ask you, is a square a rectangle? Yes, it is, because going up means true. If you were to be asked, is a square a rhombus? Yes, that is also true, because we are going up the tree. However, if we were to ask if a parallelogram is always a square, that is not true, because we are going down the tree. And if you'll notice over here, down is false. Once again, looking up the family tree is true. Going down the family tree is false. So another example of that is that a rhombus is not a square. We're going down. But if we go up, a square is a rhombus. Make sure once again that you write down what is on that tree. We've just talked about this tree as a whole. We talked about how going up is true and down is false, and I hope that the story of the quad family helps you to remember some of the attributes of these quadrilaterals. However, now we're going to go into a little bit more detail of each one of the quad family members. And before we do that, I want you to notice the key that's on your paper. It's in the upper right-hand side. And this key will tell you what the different symbols on our shapes mean. On each one of the shapes, you're going to have to draw in these markers. They're going to be in blue on each slide, and I'll make sure to draw your attention to them. But you'll notice that these arrows, those mean parallel sides. So since there are 2 here and 2 here, these 2 sides are parallel. Whereas there's only 1 arrow here and 1 arrow here, that means that the left and the right side are parallel. Not on this shape because these are right angles, but you'll often see arcs in angles, and those tell you that the angles are congruent. Here we've got 90-degree angles, so we draw little squares in the corners. Now with regards to the sides being congruent, when there's 1 tick or 1 line, that means that the top and the bottom are congruent. And over here, the left and the right are congruent because both of those sides have 2 ticks. Finally, if lines form a right angle, that means that they are perpendicular. So let's move on and learn about our different quads. First, we've got our parallelogram. Take a moment, pause this video if you want, and make sure that you put on your paper all of these blue ticks, all of these blue marks. Your teacher will be looking for them. Our first quadrilateral that we're talking about is the parallelogram. A parallelogram is a quadrilateral with 2 pairs of opposite parallel sides. Write down those 2 words. Now the diagonals cut across the shape like this. Please don't draw these on your quadrilaterals. I just want you to be able to see them, but if you draw them on, it'll make your paper really messy. So these 2 diagonals, go across your quadrilateral. And when we look at these 2 diagonals, you should be able to see that they bisect each other. The lines get cut in half where they cross here at the middle. So go ahead and circle the word bisect. Don't draw on the diagonals. All right, now let's look at our next shape. Moving over to Trappy the trapezoid. Now, Trappy the trapezoid, you'll notice that the top and bottom of Trappy the trapezoid, those 2 lines are parallel, so draw on your parallel sides arrows. And this is a quadrilateral with exactly 1 pair of parallel sides. And there's nothing special about the diagonal. So Trappy the trapezoid is pretty easy. All you have to remember is that she's got exactly 1 pair of parallel sides. Now moving on to Papa Parallelograms, kids. We've got Rhomby the rhombus here. Now you'll notice that there are a lot of markers on Rhomby the rhombus, so you're going to need to pause to make sure that you get all of these markers down. This is the first quadrilateral where we're using these angle arcs. So there's 1 here showing that this angle and this angle are congruent. And here, this angle and this angle are congruent. So make sure you get those down. If you have to pause the video. Now, once again, Rhomby the rhombus is a child of Papa Parallelogram. So a rhombus is a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. Now, if we look at Rhomby the rhombus's diagonals, don't draw those in, just watch. She's special because her diagonals are both perpendicular. Remember, perpendicular means they form a right angle in the center. And they also bisect each other, meaning they break each other into 2 equal parts. So this side of this diagonal is congruent or the same length to this side of the diagonal. So make sure you circle perpendicular and bisect. Now, the sibling of Rhomby the rhombus is Rect the rectangle. You'll notice here that the rectangle has 4 right angles. His opposite sides are congruent and parallel. Put all those markers on. He is a child of Papa Parallelogram, so Rect the rectangle is a parallelogram, but Rect the rectangle has 4 right angles. Write those down. Now if we think about the diagonals are congruent, meaning they are equal. And they also bisect each other, meaning that they cut each other in half. Circle, congruent, and bisect. Now the final quadrilateral that we're going to talk about today is square the dog. Now, square the dog, remember, it takes attributes from parallelogram, from rhombi the rhombus, and rect the rectangle. So it takes the right angles from rect the rectangle, and it takes the congruent sides from rhombi the rhombus, and it takes the opposite sides parallel from papa parallelogram. So a square is a parallelogram with 4 right angles and 4 congruent sides. Now, the cool part about these diagonals, what do you think is going to happen? Well, the diagonals are perpendicular, congruent, and bisect each other because remember, square takes attributes from rhombi the rhombus, rect the rectangle, and papa parallelogram, and it is a quadrilateral. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about here, I know this has been a long video, but we're going to have one special note. If you remember back a few minutes ago, before we talked about all the attributes, we talked about how going up the tree is true and how going down the tree is false. So just a friendly reminder that all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares, because once again, going up that tree is true, going down the tree is false. So write down, all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. There's a little space for you below square the dog. If you're a visual learner like me, you can see that here square is below rect the rectangle. So a square can be a rectangle, but rect the rectangle can't be a square. A square can be a rhombus, but a rhombus cannot be a square. Once again, going up the tree is true, and going down the tree is false. Remembering this will help you as you complete the activities that are on the paper. Make sure that you complete those activities and show your teachers so they can make sure that you are understanding all about quadrilaterals. And I hope you enjoyed this quad family story.